So this post saying, can religion and faith be categorized as mental illness? Somebody who thinks that he's a Christian, right? Saying this as a Christian, but then categorizing faith and religion as mental illness. Something's a little off by that, right? So I commented and just shared my direct experience, my encounter with God face to face, body to body, being to being, the whole presence of God filling me to overflowing. And then he responds again, saying that my tone, the certainty of my tone sounds like mental illness. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. It's the evidence of things that we don't yet see manifest in the world. It's an inner conviction, an inner knowing. It's not a blind thing. It is an inner awareness. And I've had actually a visual encounter with God, with Jesus, a visceral encounter with God and with Jesus that, I wasn't expecting to be that way. I wasn't a believer. I wasn't in church. I wasn't reading the Bible. I could only share what I actually encountered. And yet somebody who thinks themselves to be Christian thinks that everybody who has some kind of connection apparently with God and experiencing God is struggling with mental illness. So this is very interesting to me. And as I'm exploring threads more and more, it's remarkable to find the real, just the degrees of unconsciousness, like lack of knowing, those who claim to be spiritual or religious and yet have no real experience, direct encounter, those who are attacking it because they have no experience of direct encounter. There's just so much confusion and chaos and disorder out there in the human mind, and it's fascinating to me. I just find it fascinating. And it gives me a pulse on where human consciousness really is in many different pockets. There's a lot of exposure to a lot of different people there. So I've been, sharing my testimony, sharing my experience. And of course, there's people who, receive that and love that and value that and can celebrate that. There's some that are inspired by that. I've had conversations with people who profess themselves to be atheists and really acknowledge and appreciate, my background coming from a life of crime and drug dealing to turning everything around, encountering Jesus as a miracle revelation that I didn't expect, and totally gave me a different direction in my life, one that filled me with love and awareness that we originate from God as a source directly. And, I tell this because it's what I experience. I just speak the truth. And yet there's people who, because they lack that experience, they automatically denounce it, or they challenge it, or they question it, which is good, because I don't expect anyone to believe something they haven't experienced for themselves. That's part of my experience. But my encouragement is, if you haven't had the experience of God in your life, you're just not really looking. Because I was looking for truth. I was looking and seeking. I wasn't fixated on how it needed to be, but I was asking sincerely, and I was practicing meditation, sitting silently, studying nature. I was reading different books to try and find out what people were saying, to try and discern what truth was versus what it wasn't. And I just knew that I needed an experience. I needed to experience the reality. I knew the difference. I was wise enough in my early 20s, 22 years old, 21 even. I was wise enough to know that me reading something and agreeing with it in my mind or disagreeing with it in my mind doesn't necessarily prove it true or false, right? I mean, it's just the scientist in me, someone who just understands how science works. It's that, you're in a theory or hypothesis until something is proven true or proven false, whatever direction we're looking at. And so if it comes to experiencing God and you want the reality of God, well, you first must seek the possibility. You must believe that it's possible, at least as a hypothesis, right? Scientists test their hypotheses, right? They don't believe absolutely. They believe in possibility. And then they work out a formula and a set of experiments on how to test their hypothesis to prove whether their hypothesis or their belief, it's a belief, right? It's a belief in this possibility of something being true. Or maybe it's the belief that something actually isn't true. Either way, they're testing and experimenting to come to a thing that we call a proof. So it's good to get proof. But in the meantime, we must have hypotheses and we must test and experiment. If we utterly disregard the possibility, then we blind ourselves deliberately. If we blindly believe without experiencing, then we may or may not be in the truth. So I think a lot of Christians and spiritual people and non-believers, non-religious people, atheists, agnostics, they kind of live in a space of not understanding, right? Their consciousness is not wired to understand these distinctions, that you can have faith and belief in something while it's not proven to be true. And that doesn't necessarily make it absolutely true for you. And you can have total disbelief in something, and that can be blinding you completely to the possibility. So I say that there's this middle ground where you hold both sides of that spectrum, blindly believing and totally disbelieving. And you come into the middle space and you say, you know what? I'm going to be open to the possibility. I believe in the possibility. And I'm going to suspend my resistance to discovering truth. And I'm going to work out an experiment, which is what I did. And I began to think logically, reasonably, how can I experiment and what can I do to get closer to the truth about whether God is real or not? And I began to discover things, and people suggested practices and disciplines, which I took on, right? I experimented, I tested their words, right? And I was very skeptical, but I was also open to discovering truth. And that's how eventually I was led to the experience of encountering God fully and completely. And now I can testify and say it's absolutely true. I have experienced the reality. And you can call that mental illness. I say that the people in the world who don't know this are the ones who are suffering from mental illness. The illness of a mind that is hardened and closed and has not discovered the truth of what they are and what God really is. To me, that is a form of mental illness for sure. Because once you see reality, which is what God is, once you see clearly that God is everywhere present all the time, and there's nothing we can be, do, or say, or experience apart from the thing that we call God, then you're in this realization of reality. What is, and what isn't, right? Where I get that people don't believe in God, it's not that they don't believe in God. They don't believe in what people say about the word God. There are concepts, right, that they don't accept or they reject. And that's fair sometimes, because there is some delusion out there about what people say about God and profess about God and what they do in the name of God. But the reality is, God is real. God is reality. In fact, there is no reality apart from God. And I'm not telling you to believe me when I say this. I'm telling you to test this for yourself, to experiment. You have no right, just practically speaking, you have zero right to speak for or against something that you haven't proven to be true necessarily, right? With any form of absolutism, okay? You can speak only with certainty, which would be authentic at this point, when you have proven something to be true. If not, then it's time to stop, because you're just inauthentic at that point. You can believe yourself to be free to do that, but you're in a deception, right? So that can be harsh to both sides of the spectrum. The reality is, if you don't have direct experience of what it is you're speaking about, and you haven't proven by experimentation and discipline that it's true or not true, then you cannot say with certainty what it is that you're saying. That's just a fact. That's a logical fact, an inarguable fact, okay? Certainty is fully knowing, fully proving something to be true. If that has not happened, then it isn't so. Now, this goes for people who are believers and non-believers, right? Believers who have not had experience, I invite you to pursue that, to find out how to experiment. How can you know God directly, intimately? We are challenged and encouraged by others who have experienced God to do so, and I am telling you to do so. And anyone who doesn't believe, I encourage you to do the same, because you should check and see whether it's true, honestly and sincerely, and that would be authentic. Bless you.